this is upright. And then you look in the little sight glass, and you see how many drips you're going per minute, and you want it to drip about once every 6 seconds, about 10 drips a minute. And then when you're not running, put that down, and then you don't pump. I just fill it up and it's good to go.
Now your PSI, is that supposed to...
Well, I shouldn't be reading anything now, unless the thing's broken. That one doesn't work real great. Usually the PSI on this will run right around, I think 60, if I remember right, 60 to 70.
That would be this one, I'm guessing?
Yeah, they should be about the same. That one would be in here, so yeah, probably about 60.
Okay.
If its flow is working fine, you should be about 1,100 gallons a minute.
Does it work?
It does work, yeah. It should be about 1,100 gallons a minute. When you first start it up. When it's all running, I think it's about 950 to 1,000. Obviously I shut this valve when I turn it off because all the water from here drains back, and then you gotta build all the water back up again. So I usually should close this. Other than that, it's the same as the pivots up home.
What about your washer here?
Yeah, that comes from here. But you don't need that right early in the season, but that just runs right off of here. And you shut that too, otherwise it'll drain your line all the way back out as well.
You leave that running or just
I open it up when you need it. Okay. And later in the season you gotta get down there with a broom and you gotta clean that thing off. Usually, at least once a day, sometimes twice a day, morning and night.
And sometimes you gotta get down there in your underwear to shovel.
Yep. That's pretty much every year. You got to get down in here, and there'll be a lot of trash that's built up in there. And you got Connor or I usually do it. You got to get down in there. Quite often we're just butt naked, and you got to shovel out the muck. There'll be muck and silt and stuff in there, something fierce. It's nowhere near as bad as it used to be because I put some grooves on the frayed face here, and I made that. And in the winter, I drop that down in here. Okay. And it keeps the flood waters from filling it with sand. And then you have to pull it in the spring before you start irrigating. In the winter, you have to take this all loose. Take this loose, take all this loose. You want to block this up so it doesn't fall down. And you gotta lift this whole pump up. And I was pulling it all the way out and setting it on the ground, but you don't really need to do that. Just raise it up and then put blocks underneath it and keep it out of the water. Because if it freezes, it ruins it.
And you have those blocks here somewhere.
There's blocks back there on the trailer next to the fuel tank.
Okay.
So lift it all out and then lock it up.
You got to lift that out with the backhoe, obviously.
Yeah.
You can't raise it really with anything else. You got to be really careful. There's a gasket in between here. Be careful. You got to put a new one back in there. Other than that, the pivot runs pretty much the same. You want your oil level to be, I'll show you that, Kurt. Before you start it, you want your oil level to be here on the dipstick. You want it to be just above full. Does that make sense?
Right where it's at now.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
I just changed the oil on it. It leaks oil and needs to be worked on. So you can do that in the fall. As long as it's not running into the river too bad. That's the same thing. Don't put your hand there.
Oh, what are you doing here?
Spinning. Key on. You got to have this. This is a, I think it's called a Murphy switch actually. That has to be, yeah, really. That has to be in for it to start. You got to hold it in for a few seconds until your oil pressure builds up. And then when you let it off, it'll hold in. If you run out of oil, or you run low on oil, or low on coolant, it'll kill it. Look at that.
That's what that does, I'm guessing.
It does. That's a float, and if your coolant gets too low, it kills it.
Okay. And that's for oil, the one down on there, right?
That's for oil. You got your little floats there that's set up, and if that gets below the bottom one, it'll kill it. If it's too high, it also will.
So how often have you been changing that filter?
That filter, I change it every time I change oil. That's
Which
a new filter. I change after the first cutting, and I change the beginning of the year, so twice in a year.
before first cutting or after, you said?
Before first cutting, or before starting irrigating in the spring,
Yeah.
and then after first cutting, before second cutting,
How about your fuel filter?
before you irrigate on second cutting. The fuel filter I don't change quite as much, but I change that one coming off the tank every year.
And clean it out. It looks like it's got water in there now, doesn't it?
I think it's just got junk at the bottom, but you can open it and drain it.
There's a...
You open that and drain the crud out of it.
Oh, it's just a seam.
And this pivot runs at 1950 RPMs.
What's that?
This pivot runs at 1950 RPMs there, little bird raft clan.
Alright.
And the throttle on this one does work. It doesn't creep. The one up home creeps a bit.
Okay,
Just
how's
set
your,
it and then lock it.
how's your air filter?
I took it out and cleaned it off.
Okay.
I have a new one up home I'll put in. I just didn't get down here with it when I first brought it. So to run everything, start the motor, let it warm up. This one you get your clutch in first, and then you go over and you open up the valve. Then once the valve's open, clutch is on, you come back over and you throttle it up. And then you can go over and you turn on your electricity. The bottom box over there is for the big pivot. The top box over there is for the small pivot.
Oh, okay. So both of them have to be turned on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, depends if you're using both, I guess.
Yeah, if you're using both. Yep, exactly. Usually you're using both, but sometimes you get down to where you can't get much water and you kind of just run one pivot in the wheel line.
Now, how many horsepower is this guy?
Oh, no, exactly. That's a good question. This used to have all that info and it's all worn off. This thing's got a lot of horsepower. It's been a while since I had this one in town. It's been a few years.
How many times a week or month?
Same as the other ones.
3 days.
Oh, this one pretty much stays all the time. The water down, the ground down here is more gravelly. So you leave it on most of the time. The wheel line, I move it morning, first thing in the morning, and then at night. So usually between 7 or 8 in the morning, or sometimes before that, and then about 7 or 8 at night, move it again. So every 12 hours. If you leave it sitting there for 24 hours, it tends to kill the alfalfa. That soil there is not very great, and it kind of forms kind of like a bog out there in the middle, and it kills the alfalfa out. So morning and night. Once you start it, you're kind of married to it for a month or two. Once you get rain.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it for this.